All right, if you open your Bibles to Romans 13. Romans 13. This is the Patriot's most difficult chapter in the Bible. What's up? Sister Kelly, would you mind reading Romans 13, 1 through 7?
Let every person be subject to the governing authority, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all that what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed.
All right. Thank you, sister. All right. So, authority. We're going to leave this one in context. I'm not going to define authority this time. I've defined it in the past. That for American citizens, the authority is the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States. It's not the elected officials. The documents are our authority in this country. Our founders set it up just like the Bible is to the church, so the Constitution is to our nation. That's the authority. Now, within that scope of authority, just like in the church, are there certain people to whom God has entrusted responsibility in the church? Yes. And the failure to submit to them when they exercise their duties is rebellion against God. The failure to be obedient or to be subject to those authorities that the Constitution has ordained when they exercise their authority in agreement with the Constitution is rebellion and anarchy. And you say, no, I want to make that clear because I'm not the preacher that says just blindly obey the government in everything and goes to Romans 13 to support that trash. Okay? Because Paul will say enough stuff here without having to give more to the man than is warranted. First fact is, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. These governing authorities, those are human agents. We are to be subject to them. Why? Because there is no authority except it is ordained from God. God's the one who ordained it. Every nation has the leaders it deserves. People don't like to hear that. And if a people don't like their leaders, then the people need to become better leaders The people need to become better people in order to have better leaders. Very seldom in all of history is there a leader or a system of leadership that is ever higher than the median level of the conscience of its people. And you can argue that with me all day long. You'll lose, because everything in the Bible supports it. The judges of Israel, were they the best, most righteous people ever in the Bible? No. Were they the best that God had to pick from because the nation was so bad?
Probably.
Yes. The people wanted to be bad, and the best God had to pick from was the ones who were their judges. And yet they still make the hall of faith. Samson, Barak, Deborah, Jephthah. Okay? But they're ordained by God. So when people are praying against, say, Putin and for Zelensky, have you lost your ever-loving mind? You're praying against someone else's authority and praying for someone else's authority while we complain about our own authority. You understand you can't really, that doesn't work that way. The authority that is ordained by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, or the one that God has appointed, God's appointment. This applies to the church, it applies to nations. Is every elder that's ever been ordained in every church in the last 200 years been necessarily 100% qualified all the time? No. Nor every deacon, nor every preacher. But what? If what they say is in agreement with the Word of God, whether you like them or you don't like them, whether elder, evangelist, deacon, doesn't matter, submit. And we'll see here in just a second, when you reach a place, and we touched on this Wednesday night in 2 Peter, that when you have people that will not respect the structure and the order to things, you're on the wrong side of God. Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 2, he talked about false teachers. He said they do not even withhold themselves from doing what even the angels won't presume to do. The angels don't even rebuke the fallen angels by their own. They just say, the Lord rebuke you. But men say what? Men say all kinds of bad things about the devil. Whose four-star general was the devil till the devil decided to engage in treason? The Lord's. Who made the devil a highly exalted being? God. You say, no. When you blaspheme the devil that was made by the Lord. Now, when the Lord made him, did the Lord make him to be that way? Nope. But he still retains everything the Lord made him with. And I give you this to think about. You remember when 2 Samuel opens up? Saul and Jonathan and a few other of Saul's sons are all dead. David's now the undisputed king of a civil war. And a guy comes to David and he says, yeah, I took care of the problem for you, king. Because he thought what? What did the guy think?
He thought he'd be proud of it.
He thought if he was the guy to put down David's enemy, that David would exalt him. But guess what? Was it that guy's place to put Saul in check?
David said it was.
And who remembers what David did?
He annihilated him.
Yeah, he had that guy put to death quick. And he said, but brother, he didn't really do it. No, but he took credit for it. And he died for it. Because there wasn't anybody to argue with it.
But he said, how dare he kill the one appointed by God.
How dare he kill the Lord's anointed?
Right.
This principle, and I'll grab you in just a second, Cynthia. This principle, you and I don't have a high enough pay grade in a whole lot of areas to shoot our mouths off about what should or should not be in things that frankly are beyond our ability to comprehend. Do I like our current president? I do not like his policies. I do not like what he does. But you know what? It is what it is. For people who say our last president was a whatever, he was just a different kind of wicked. But how many Christian churches? He didn't get reelected. How will God ever save America now? You know how God save America? When the church gets back to the business of being the church and preaching the gospel. When the church cares more about being holy and being obedient than complaining about who our president is or our governor. But we spend more time in prayer for them than we do speaking cursing against them. Because why? I love when people say, if I was president, if you're president, you'd probably have a heart attack or stroke out within about a week. You ain't never had that much stress in your life. The leadership of nations and being able to set the course of an entire chunk of the world for years or decades, when most people have a hard time managing their yard and their house.
Amen.
Be subject to what God's put in place, because whether you or I think it's bad, the option of total anarchy and of might makes right and no restraining force against any of it. Don't think, people tell me, if it was anarchy, I'd be the last man standing on my block. No, you probably wouldn't. Because you don't know everybody on your block, and someone on your block probably more skilled than you. And they know that you'd be the second to last man standing, so they're going to take you out first. That's how anarchy works. So all these arguments about why we don't have to submit shows a disregard for God's wisdom that he has set up nations for the general management, for life to have basic structure, for us to operate within it, to do what it is he tells us to do, which is good works. Cynthia.
Yes, I was thinking about how Paul advises us to, that first, I urge that first of all, First Timothy 2, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings, and for those in authority. So we'll do that, and that will eliminate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He says that intercession of complaint should be made for all in authority. No, prayer. Why? Because he goes on and says what? So that we can lead quiet and peaceable lives. That's why we make intercession for them, for our own benefit. So that we can lead peaceable lives. Why? So that we can minister the gospel. Because it's God's will for all men to be saved. Did you know you cannot fight the kingdom of men and at the same time fight for the kingdom of God against the kingdom of darkness? You cannot war in the flesh, the war you're supposed to be warring in the spirit, and ever advance in both. It will not work. It will not work.
Our brother, years ago, David Lipscomb, if I remember my history correctly, even carried this thing to the point that he didn't really encourage Christians to even vote.
Yeah.
And now, he did not say he didn't promote anarchy or anything like that, but he promoted not taking any part in civil government.
And here would be my only argument against Brother Lipscomb on that. In all the history of the world, people don't understand what democracy was in ancient Greece. Everyone didn't get a vote. Only people who held citizen status. But anybody, either natural born or naturalized in this country, has the ability to place their value for as much righteousness as they can. And Brother Lipscomb's argument, and it didn't just touch us, it goes back and forth through a lot of different denominations, to say to people of biblical conscience to neglect the land in which they live when they have an opportunity to support as much righteousness as possible, is a cavalier attitude, and it actually disrespects what God says here, because the authority that God put in place was so that we as a free people could support as much life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in righteousness as possible.
What I'm reading right here, what you're saying is full agreement with what I'm reading here. I think it's our responsibility to obey and be obedient servants of the government, as long as it doesn't force us to disobey God.
You know,
I mean, that's pretty much what it boils down to it.
and prior to what, 1975, 76, when they did away with the draft. Unlike most other countries, this country always made an exception what? If because of your First Amendment right of the exercise of your faith,
Yeah.
you cannot take up arms to kill your fellow man at the direction of your government, we will hereby give you an exemption. So this is even a civil government, as bad as our government is right now, and as bad as our government's been. Our government has always recognized that it cannot compel people to live in obedience to the government in opposition to their faith. And so Brother Lipscomb's point was, honestly, in my opinion, extremely irresponsible.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think I can rephrase what you said a while ago. We have a Christian responsibility to insert as much Christianity into our society as we possibly can, and by voting and by trying to express what we think's right any way we can. I think that's our responsibility.
Yeah. Casting your vote is an easy way to say where you want your salt placed on the meal you're going to eat for the next 2, 4, 6 years.
Yeah.
You know, and so verse 3 says, rulers are not a terror to good works. Well, what good works? Let's look back at chapter 12, verse 9. Love. What else? Be kindly affectioned, verse 10. Verse 10, giving, benevolence. Verse 11, being diligent in your work. Verse 12, being patient, being steadfast in prayer. Very few governments ever make a law that say you can't pray. They just tell you that you can't pray in certain locations or at certain times in those locations. But very few governments ever in the history of the world have ever said you can't pray. What else? Verse 13, distributing to the needs of others, given to hospitality, blessing. Blessing is a good work. Rejoicing with those who rejoice, weeping with those who weep. What else? Don't repay evil for evil. No government has ever made a law that says you're going to go to prison because you didn't do evil to people who did evil to you. There's no law that says that. That's the works. In context, that's the works he's talking about. What else? Why? Because it's not for us to be the avengers. If your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink. Rulers are not a terror to those things. When governments persecute Christianity, what's the main thing they try and shut down? That Christ is Lord. Now, everything that we do that flows out of that, even the Nazis didn't stop Christians from being kind. They just told them you can't be kind to certain people. But the overall concept of kindness and hospitality, they never made a law against it. If tomorrow the government says, I want to make sure everybody's clear on this. When we took a couple and a half months off 2 years ago, we did so by voluntary choice. Ronnie and Tommy and I, we had multiple phone and in-person conversations. And what it came down to, and when we suspended it for that basically 2 weeks worth of services in August when the whole county busted out with a massive outbreak of COVID. One time in Texas, I suspended church services for about 10 days because the flu outbreak was so bad. I wanted my people that did not have to go out to go out. Because I didn't need more of my old people catching flu or catching pneumonia and dying, unnecessarily. And we didn't have streaming then. We chose to do it out of a kindness toward our neighbor, to be in concert with the goal of our leaders to try and flatten the curve. He said, you still did because, no, we did not do it because the government said. Because if you remember back what the president said, I'm asking you to voluntarily. He never said, I command you. Because just so we're clear, if he would have said, I command you to not meet church services, I'd have lit a bonfire on Saturday night, and we'd have had bonfire church services on Saturday night, and we'd have rolled all the way through till Sunday night. Someone, what if they would have come? Bring it. It is one thing when we choose, out of kindness towards our neighbors, when there is a disease that is unknown and unchecked, spreading, if we choose to suspend for a period of time. But we had the stuff in motion so that we never missed a beat going straight to live stream, and we did not miss a beat coming back as we brought everything back on. But if the same government says you will not meet in churches, you will not assemble like they did in California, I'm very disappointed the brethren there didn't say, you know what? Everyone of every denomination assemble, because there's not enough people to put everybody in jail for everybody assembling. In Indiana and. Because do we have a command to assemble?
Yes.
Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the habit of some. So if the government tells you that, we'll pay our taxes for you to pay for the people who will come and arrest us. But we still gonna assemble. Why? We do not bow down to government that commands us to be disobedient to God. Period. But on everything else, no. Good works, they don't make a rule. Verse 3, do what's good, you'll have praise from the same. How many presidents that have been very sketchy have brought in people of faith and given them awards because of their good works in their communities? But in those presidents' own lives and policies, they were promoters of evil. He is God's minister to you. Not for the children of the devil, but for the church. For good. But if you do evil, be afraid. He does not bear the sword in vain. He's God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. If someone beats up 3 people in a store, leaves one of them unconscious, robs it blind, and runs down the street and gets shot by a cop, do not tell me the cop used excessive force. Don't care. You say, you don't know the arguments. Yeah, I do, because I've worn a badge and I've carried a gun, and I know what it's like to have people try and kill you when you wear a badge. I've had more than a few people that shot at me when I had a badge on. Catherine didn't know about it till, over 10 years had passed after I, was no longer working law enforcement. She'd say, how was patrol tonight? I said, it's all right, just another night on patrol. Man, I don't want her more nervous than she already was. They don't bear it in vain. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath. Now, Kelly's had because of the wrath of God. Within the context, I think it's still the wrath of the state. Because he's talking about the state bearing the sword not in vain to execute wrath. But it can go either way. But also for what? Conscience sake. If you're obedient to as much of the law as you can be as a Christian, for the most part, do you have to think or worry about law enforcement? If every time you see a state trooper or a deputy or a police officer sitting on the side of the road in a hidey hole, you get nervous, get your speed back under control. Okay? Why? Conscience sake. For because of this, now listen to this, for because of this you also pay taxes, for they're God's ministers attending continue this very thing. The Roman government was equally as wicked as our government. And I've listened to Christians argue that they don't have a moral obligation to pay taxes because our government funds abortion clinics, or our government does this, or our government does that. Years ago, I settled my question on taxes, that in my heart, I believe every tax dollar that I give only goes towards making sure our military is well cared for. You say, but they do other things. Not with my part of it, they don't. My part of it only goes to provide for the people who keep the wolf off of the doorstep.
What do you do, write that at the bottom of your check?
I would, but the government goes on ahead and gets the cut before I ever see it. Right? And you say, Because I know this, our government spends money we don't even have. So I can honestly say my taxes and your taxes only go for the stuff that can actually be afforded. Because the rest of the stuff they're doing, there's no taxes on it. They're just making it up. They're just making it up. Because do you derive benefit from paying taxes? Yeah. Would you prefer to have a county without a sheriff's office? Would you prefer to have a state without a road department or DOT? Considering some of the fights that we have picked at various times around the world, would you prefer to have a military that's only about 100,000 people standing? You say, there's other benefits. Yeah, I know. But the one that keeps the wolf off the doorstep and the one that makes it easy to drive to the grocery store and for the trucks to bring stuff from the field to the grocery store, I'm content. I'm content. Because that is for my good. That's for your good. That's for all of our goods. You say, well, they take more than they should. Who remembers what the Lord said to the nation of Israel when they wanted a king?
Be like everybody else.
We'll be like everybody else. And what'd you say, Dick?
It's gonna cost me.
He's going to take more money than he deserves. He's going to make taxes on you, and things are going to be a burden in ways you never knew it before. What are the two things governments love? Civil order and tax money. As long as you give them those two things, you know what most governments do? Leave you alone. They leave you alone. And if you want proof of that, go back to the book of Acts. When the governor of when the administrator of the city was afraid they were about to have a riot, he was like, we need to go home now, because if the centurion hears that a riot's about to erupt, the legion will come in and the legion will restore order. And everybody went home quick. Because why? When the legion came in to restore order, they didn't do it with plastic shields like our police and tear gas. They came in with the big shields and the sword, and they just killed everything in front of them. And they said, all right, order's been restored. 10,000 people are dead. But we put everything back in order today. That was the Roman mindset. So we pay taxes because we derive benefit from it. Not because we agree with everything, but because we derive benefit. And God is the one who says this is why you pay taxes. So we just need to get over it. Render therefore to all their due. Taxes to whom taxes. Revenue to whom revenue, or custom to whom custom. Fear to whom fear, or respect to whom respect. And honor to whom honor. Does the President of the United States deserve honor?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't care if it's a man, a woman. I don't care if it's whatever color. I don't care if they're tall, short, fat, skinny. Don't care. Does a city councilman deserve honor? Or an alderman, or whatever your local level of government is? Yeah. Why? Because even though they make dumb decisions, I can honestly say, having been a city councilman, and I banned people when I still had my Facebook up when I was on the city council. If you have a problem with something I voted on or said in the city council, you have my phone number, it's public, and you know where I am Monday through Sunday. You come by and see me. Don't you put that trash on my Facebook. Because I said, I'm not going to get into political debate with you on my Facebook in the comment section. When I left office, there were people who hated me because we put in a wastewater, water reclamation and runoff utility. And it was one of the few things that you actually paid what was fair. If there was a store that had 250,000 square foot of paved parking lot, they paid a higher fee than someone with a house that was surrounded by grass. Because you have to do something with water runoff. And most communities don't have proper gutters and proper drainage. And most cities don't fix it because if they don't have that in there, it has to come out of the general fund. But if it's a separate utility, that when you pay your water bill, that every single person who gets a water bill has to pay it. So every company, you see, that was the beauty of how they designed it. Company paying the water bill, they paying for this too. And I had people said all I did was increase the burden and made their life miserable. But when the rain did come in Texas, there were a couple times it came so bad that we had to basically shut the city down for about 12 to 18 hours because some parts of it were so impassable because the water management system for water runoff was not able to handle it. And police barricaded main highways because of it. And I pushed for it, and I made the decision for one reason. Because I knew it was something that no city manager, no political backdoor, and no city council could ever touch the money or use it for anything other than improving water runoff and gutters so that the stuff could actually get fixed, because it is a felony that comes with prison time if you ever tamper with that money and try and use it for anything else. It was the only thing I could pass to actually make the city better that no one could get their grubby hands on without going to prison. And people cursed me up one wall and down the other. But you know what they did when it rained and they couldn't get out? Then they cursed me and everyone else on the council because we didn't take care of the roads. And when the next council came in and a couple people got voted in that I wasn't a fan of, people came to me and they said, Brian, go back to the city council meeting and chew them alive. And I said, no. I said, I've done been in that seat. And I said, you who are asking me to chew them alive now are the same ones who condemned me 3 months ago when I was still on the council because you didn't like something I did. I said, I'm going to stay out of it, and I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to let those people do the best job they can, according to their conscience, for the benefit of as many people as possible. And if you got a problem with them, you need to go talk to them, not to me. Because most of the people who serve, they do it because they do want their part of the world to be better when they leave than when they started. That is why they serve. And you say, not all of them. No, not all of them. But most of them. Most of them. And last time I checked, everybody we've ever elected to office, are they sinners living in a sinful world being attacked by the devil just like everybody else?
Yes.
So when they make sinful decisions, dumb decisions, should we be surprised? Because it only further serves the devil's goal. So when children of the devil make devil decisions, you can't get upset with them because they're under control of the devil. And when children of God don't read the book of Proverbs to learn how to govern, and don't read all those kings and all those prophets about how to govern, can we be too surprised when children of God make decisions where government's concerned that isn't the wisest choice? Now let me ask you this. If tomorrow every decision that your government made was wise according to God's standard, are you and I 100% sure that where we are in our own souls is in such a place that we would rejoice at every single decision? Because some of them would probably actually make our lives a little more uncomfortable. Would you necessarily turn cartwheels if every law tomorrow was wise, righteous, and godly?
You didn't go to meddling now.
Yeah, that's it.
So, thoughts, comments, or questions? I do want to close with verse 8. We'll pick up verse 8 next week. Owe no one anything except to love one another. Do your good works, discharge your duty to God, pay your taxes, give respect where you need to, where government stuff is concerned, and discharge your minimum duty. And from that point forward, you're now in a place of freedom no matter where you live, because the only thing now that you owe anybody is what you owe to God and what God has given to you, and that is his love. And go back to what he said back in chapter 5. For the love of God is shed upon our hearts, or poured out upon our hearts through the Holy Spirit. That now at that point, you're free to serve God, because the only thing that anybody can get from you is love. Because you done took care of paying Caesar his Caesar thing.